The following program is brought to you in part by the film Backdoor Channels, The Price of Peace.
Welcome to another Leon Charney report, and we are back in the studio after a long visit to Israel, where you saw interviews that we had with Dani Atum, the former chief of the Mossad, Ruby Rivlin, the speaker of the Knesset, Tzipi Livni, who seems to be very strong right now in the Likud government, and then we brought you some Bible scholars, some psychiatrists. Don't complain. So today we have with us Ron Rosenbaum. You remember he was on our show a couple of weeks ago, and he wrote a book, Those Who Forgot the Past, which is, he is talking about basically anti-Semitism, Nazis, etc. He's a little bit worried about what's going on in this country right now, if I remember correctly. Then we have Alon Ben Meir, who's going to tell us whether Arik Sharon is in trouble or not, because he made a speech in the Knesset, and they did a vote on acceptance of the speech. It was never heard of that the Knesset would turn him down on such a vote. I mean, it's a cosmetic vote, and he was turned down 54 to something. So there's big troubles in Israel on the plan for disengagement. And then we're going to have Jonathan Trichter on, who's our pollster from PACE, who's going to tell us whether debates were won or lost by Kerry or Bush or Nader, who knows what, and who's going to win the election. So it's a jam-packed show. Welcome, Ron. Good to see you again.
Thank you.
Let me show this book, Those Who Forget the Past, The Question of Anti-Semitism. So I'm reading my Jewish history books lately, and I find that a pretty big author named Max de Montt, he wrote the Jew God and History, writes in his book that there is a huge difference between anti-Semitism and anti-Jewish. And that anti-Semitism only gave rise around the 1800s.
The name anti-Semitism was invented by a guy named Wilhelm Marr, a German racist pseudoscientist. But I don't think it was a new name for an old phenomenon. I mean, he tried to give it a scientific racial basis, but of course it's a stupid basis because Arabs are Semites and all that. But it caught on, and we're sort of stuck with it. I mean, Judeo Phobia is another word that people
Semites
use.
could include non-Jews also.
Totally, it's not a great phrase.
His theory is, I might have a neighbor next door to me that is Jewish, Polish, who knows what. I might not like that person, so I might become anti-Jewish because he does things that I don't like, but I don't want to kill him. In his dictionary, or his association, or what he thinks anti-Semitism was, when there was a mass of people who want to destroy, obliterate the Jewish people, totally wipe out the race. So when you're anti-Jewish, you may be against the ghetto Jews, but you don't want to kill them. You might make miserable life for them, or who knows what. But when you're anti-Semitic, that means you're committed to killing the race, which is what Hitler was.
Well, you know, it seems to me a distinction without a difference, because certainly Hitler was anti-Jewish as well as anti-Semitic. Right. So, like, why quibble about names? It seems to me like it doesn't get us further. We don't learn a lot more from making that distinction.
But it is interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's true that anti-Semitism is not the best word for it. Jew hatred is probably the best word for it. But I don't necessarily buy this thing about you want to kill only one Jew, it's anti-Jewish. You want to kill them all, it's anti-Semitic. I mean, it just doesn't seem...
What do you believe the roots of anti-Semitism are? Jealousy?
There's a great essay in this book, which is a collection of 50 essays. It's by Cynthia Ozick, one of the great American writers. And she traces it. I mean, most people would say it started when Christianity defined itself against Judaism as opposed to being a descendant of Judaism, and were the anti-Judaizers in the Paul among them in Christianity.
By the way,
it goes back to the classical times.
But you know why that happened? It's interesting. Christianity became very easy to apply to, in a sense, when Paul wrote the book, and they got.
He dropped circumcision. Of course, he made it much more user-friendly.
That's right. It became very user-friendly, so it attached people. To be a Jew was much more complicated. You had to be, in a sense, a monotheist who believed that the Messiah will come and the development of these Messiahs, whereas you want to become a Catholic, it was Christian and easy.
Just had to say a few words. And in the early church, there was a kind of theological struggle, and those who believed in saying that the Jews had rejected Jesus and would be condemned for it, and were a stubborn people and were an outcast people. Right. We should allow them to live, but they should never be happy, because there'd be a living example of the consequences of rejecting Jesus, and that faction won. And
but wasn't there a hatred against the Jews who wouldn't convert? They wanted people to convert. That's where it really began.
I think so, but I think it's also that the Jews threatened the new Christian theology, because Christianity defined itself sort of as a completion of Jewish scripture. And the Jews were there to say, not according to us, and so that there was a hatred, and I think it's theologically based. And then over the years, it just became a very useful device whenever there was a trauma in a troubled society, of course.
Right. The Russian anti-Semitism at the time of the Tsars, and there was no reasoning for it. It was just anti-Jewish or anti-Semitic. I mean, it was brutal. It was absolutely brutal.
It was brutal, and we're still suffering from it. Like it was the Russian secret police that invented the protocols of the Elders of Zion, the original theory about the world Jewish conspiracy.
I'm not sure many people know about that. It was a huge book that was created in Russia, saying that the Jews were conspiring really through businesses and through other ways of taking over all the systems that make the world happen, and they really should be obliterated.
Right. It was that the Jews were pulling the strings to manipulate the Gentiles for power.
How big did that book become?
The book, unfortunately, was translated into many languages. It was Henry Ford here in America produced his own version of it. Hitler was introduced to it by Alfred Rosenberg, and it became an extremely big influence on Hitler, and who cribbed from it from Mein Kampf. And we see it today. You see it on the internet, sort of, modern versions of the protocols of the Elders of Zion, in the idea that the Mossad was behind 9/11. All this garbage, comes from that sort of template.
Are people interested in books like yours today?
I think that Jews want to know the source of this unique kind of hatred, and they want to know what the prospects for the future are.
What do you see in your book as the prospects for the future?
I have to admit, I think of myself as a pessimist. I mean, are you
worried about assimilation?
I'm not as worried about assimilation as I am worried about a nuclear exchange between Iran and the State of Israel sometime in the next 10 years.
All right, that's a big topic. I went into that topic very thoroughly in Israel, especially with Yuval Steinitz, who was chairman of the Defense and Foreign Affairs Committee, and I did it with Dani Otom. And I can tell you, we can check with Alon Ben Meir, but I can tell you that it's number one on the agenda of Israel. The crisis in Israel is to hold back and not think that they can replicate what they did in Iraq in '81, which Menachem Begin successfully did, because Iran is a totally different bowl of fish, and they've got to be very cautious. So the government line is, look, those rockets or those nuclear, whatever they are, facilities can endanger Europe. Europe should be very nervous, and the United States should be very nervous, and they should take care of it. Israel should really stay out of it. That's the official line. But sub rosa, my feeling is that they probably have a plan there to do something, but they have to hold back because there are a lot of different problems that would come about if that did happen.
I think it's just very troubling because
well, they have government anti-Semitism because the Iranian government, I'm not sure about the people because there's a great mix there, as a policy want to wipe out the Jewish state.
Hashemi Rafsanjani, famous Iranian mullah, did some arithmetic a couple years ago, and he said, well, we know that if we attack the state of Israel in a nuclear exchange with our rockets and the bomb that we will soon have, we might lose 15 million people when they retaliate. But on the other hand, there are 1 billion Muslims in the world, and we will succeed in wiping out the 5 million Jews of Israel. And that's,
Yeah, and you know why that works? Unfortunately, a theory. Because if you send nuclear bomb, let's say Israel takes its nuclear and bombs them, there'll be radioactivity which will kill 15 billion, but they don't care.
Yeah, that's right.
Whereas Israel could be obliterated, it could be wiped out.
Then the numbers
So they're
aren't.
willing to sacrifice. It's absolutely true.
Yeah.
And there was a book written years ago, a model called the Masada Plan or something like that, where there was a standoff at that time maybe between Egypt and Jordan because there was no peace treaty. But the rule was, okay, if you bomb me, I bomb you, we radioactive the whole place, so no one's going to do anything. It was a standoff. But you're absolutely correct in what you say about they don't care. You're right. That's a treacherous position.
And you know what I think is troubling
You're
is
so right
that the demonization of Israel by the world's media has made this easier to happen because it sort of delegitimized the Jewish state. They use Nazi metaphors for when the Jews try to defend
You're
themselves.
absolutely right. There's a creeping anti-Semitism in Europe and there is also a system in place now to try and put Israel in a racist situation. They compare it now to South Africa before it got its, so to speak, independence. So they're trying to box Israel into a place where it's a racist country against the Palestinians, and this is troubling.
The double standard is really astonishing. I mean, just here in America, even. You will hear in the political discourse, in the debates, someone will say, well, Iraq was not a source of terrorism. Well, I'm sorry, Iraq was financing parties for suicide bombers and giving bonuses of $25,000 to the families of people who blew up Israeli children. And so don't tell me Iraq was not a source of terrorism. What you're saying, and if the people who say that is, Jews don't count. You can kill, if you kill Americans, that's terrorism. But killing a bunch of Jews, that's not somehow something to be taken into account.
All right, 2 questions. Number 1, how did you get so involved in this? And 2, I want to talk about the current candidates and what you think would be better in terms of Jews, not only Israel, but as an American Jew.
Okay. Number 1, briefly, I spent 10 years writing a book called Explaining Hitler, The Search for the Origins of His Evil, and it was about a critique of the theories of the origins of Hitler's anti-Semitism, its particular virulence, so I spent a lot of time studying that subject. It was published by Random House in 1998, translated in 10 languages, great reviews, etc., etc., but I thought this was something that was safely in the past. I thought this, it was 1998.
Did that book sell well?
Yeah, it was a bestseller, and there was a peace process going on. It was only after 2001 that I suddenly realized we are seeing a form of Hitlerism again.
And that's why you wrote this?
Oh, yeah, I mean, I compiled it. It's a long introduction by me, but there are like 50 brilliant writers and thinkers talking about various aspects of this subject. After 2001, I felt
Well, what made you interested in Hitler?
It's interesting. I grew up in a very assimilated suburban community on Long Island, Bayshore.
Really?
And didn't know any Holocaust survivors. The figure 6 million was an abstraction to me.
Your parents were American born?
Parents were American born. most third, fourth generation.
Interesting.
But shortly before my father had a stroke, and he told me that he had a second cousin who, from the French branch of his Hungarian family, who died in the Holocaust. And looking back on it now, I think that made a difference to me, because it shouldn't have made a difference. I mean, but it made me feel that all of Hitler's victims were part of my extended family in some way, and made me, I was an investigative reporter, and I wanted to...
Where did you go to college?
I was at Yale.
Did you study anything about Judaism in Yale?
Almost nothing. I was an English major.
Really? The symbol of Yale is in Hebrew, by the way.
I know, and I could barely read it. But you know, so anyway,
That's interesting.
you know, I suppose I came to this late, but you know, I think it's everyone's duty.
It's burning in you. I mean, it's a passion right now.
It really is. I mean,
all right, let's talk about Bush and Kerry. Where do you come out on that?
Bush was my classmate at Yale.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Tell me about it.
I didn't know him. I knew some friends of his who were preppies. You know.
He's a real frat guy, huh?
At Yale, frat guy says one thing, preppy says another thing.
Okay, tell me the difference.
Preppies were the guys who went to St. Paul's and Andover and Choate and places like this, expensive private schools, and basically ran Yale when I got there. There was still, I think it was the last year of the Jewish quota when I got to Yale.
Really?
And I didn't experience anti-Semitism there, but anyway, preppies did rule the place, and George Bush was a typical preppy. He was a frat boy also. Some of the preppies were like classier in a way. Bush was a member of DEEC, which was
Tell me, Ron,
yeah.
Everybody talks about the brilliance and non-brilliance of George Bush. Did he have to have grades to get in, or he had pedigree to get into Yale?
I think he got in mostly as a legacy candidate, but I don't think he's necessarily stupid. I think he's ignorant and ill-informed and a lazy, you know. I mean, but on the other hand, okay, now that I've put him down, let me talk about the other side of it. I was out in Ohio.
I want to hear it.
I was out in Ohio recently, the big swing state. And I had speaking at temples in Columbus and Cincinnati. And so I was talking with a lot of Jews about this subject. And one of them said something that stayed with me, you know. One of them said, Bush gets it about Israel. And to a certain extent, I agree with that. You know,
Israel's wall to wall for Bush, by the way.
Yeah,
Wall to wall.
Bush gets that terrorism is indivisible. It's something to be opposed, and he admires the Israeli struggle against it, et cetera, et cetera. And I tend to agree that, you know, in larger terms, Bush does get it. I mean, he has this.
You talk in terms of Judaism and Israel.
And Israel and Israel's right to fight for their survival, for their self-defense.
What he did, well, I've said this 100 times, I'll repeat it because we're coming near the election. What he did by taking off the table the right of return for Palestinian refugees to Israel is, to me, tantamount to a Balfour Declaration that takes that right off the table.
He really revised it radically. On the other hand, I feel that he had a great idea for fighting terror that was good for the Jews as well, which is that you fight terror by promoting democracy in the Middle East, which is the source of the breeding ground of terror.
Which is not very easy.
And the Iraq War was his showcase for that. And it was a great idea, and it looked like it was working, but I feel his inattentiveness. I blame him for, you know, not correcting the course and making this work, because he's delegitimized that idea, I think, to a certain extent, by his failure to execute.
All right, so tell me about your fellow alumnus in John Kerry.
John Kerry. He was a couple years earlier than me. I used to check out books for him in my scholarship job at the Yale Reserve Book, and he was already like styled himself JFK, and you know, and he was a rising
There
politician.
was a piece, by the way, on Frontline, Channel 13 the other day, which compared them.
Yeah.
I don't know if you saw it.
I didn't.
They were pretty negative to Bush and a little more positive to Kerry, at least because of the war and the Vietnam and all that business. But tell me about Kerry, about his relationship to Israel, to Jews, etc. You know, his brother's a Jew, his grandparents were Jewish. Who knows?
Very, very hard to tell. You know,
you can't get a feeling out of it.
You know, because did he really only just recently discover that his grandparents were Jewish? You know, he pretended to be Irish for a long time.
Maybe they were dancing with Madeleine Albright's parents.
Exactly. You know, I mean, you just wonder, how, you know, the lack of curiosity, or whether this discovery, you know, actually was, you know, and the brother, and when I was in Ohio, the pro-Kerry Jews would say, well, his brother's Jewish. That means nothing to me, you know, because there are a lot of Jews with whom I disagree, you know, and the fact that his brother's Jewish doesn't.
All right,
you know.
at the end of the day, if you had to make a call, can you make it?
I find myself really conflicted about it. I find myself like really antagonized by a lot of the Kerry supporters, and I don't think that Kerry has a party or a base that is willing to support, if we're just talking about this issue of Israel and the Jews, that is willing to support his that kind of leadership, the way Bush has been able to take his party behind his policy. However, I do feel that Bush has, you know, in some way delegitimized a good policy by failure of execution. So
was the war in Iraq a positive move or a negative move?
I think it was a just cause. I believe in,
all right,
you know.
So to wrap it up for you, think that you have to be affirmatively against terrorism. You can't wait till. Kerry made sort of a silly statement in the New York Times. I wasn't in the country, but he said that terrorism is a nuisance. Well,
he said he wants to, you know, he's made it. That's the thing. Both he and Edwards have made sort of a mixed series. You know, they both have said we want to hunt down and kill Al Qaeda and all terrorists. Well, that's fine. And then the nuisance statement was a little bit misinterpreted. I mean, what he said was, you know, we'd like to. I think what he meant to say was, we'd like to hunt down and kill enough of these terrorists so that we could go back to the way we were before 2001.
All right. That's not a bad statement.
It's a.
How about his statement? And we're running out of time, about Cheney's daughter being a lesbian. Do you think that was out of place?
It struck me as odd both times. I mean, Edwards brought it up too, and it's hard for me to believe that they could be that cruelly Machiavellian as to, like, you know, want to send a signal to homophobes or something like that. You know, so I can't really make up my mind about that.
All right, we're out of time. We're going to bring you back right after the election. You'll do analysis for it. He writes for the New York Observer. That's the pink sheet. I don't mean pink in terms of being a pink place, but I usually meant communist. But they are colorful, and it's the New York Observer.
In modern Middle East history, only one peace treaty has stood the test of time, the 1978 Camp David Accord. In the new documentary film, Backdoor Channels, The Price of Peace, learn the true story behind the greatest diplomatic achievement of our time and its lessons for the future.
The price of peace is very high. To have this courageous man and my close friend killed.
Winner of the Telly Award for Best Cultural Program. Now available at select stores including Barnes & Noble and online at Amazon.com. Now get the book the hit movie was based on, Leon Charney's Backdoor Channels. Learn about the backdoor channel negotiations that led to the historic 1978 Israeli-Egyptian peace treaty. Become a witness to history and order Backdoor Channels online at Amazon or Barnes & Noble. Also available at all other retailers and booksellers. Or download the audiobook at iTunes or Audible.com. Relive history. Order Backdoor Channels. Get best-selling author Leon Charney's latest book, The Battle of the Two Talmuds. Join Charney as he explores years of Jewish history to find out why and how Talmudic scholars and rabbis abandoned the Holy Land for the lands of the diaspora. Learn about the power struggles behind the creation of the Jerusalem and Babylonian Talmuds. It's a book critics call engaging and enlightening. A book which will be of interest to people of every faith. Now available at Amazon and Barnes & Noble, or download the audiobook of The Battle of the Two Talmuds at iTunes or Audible.com. Leon Charney sets out to discover the true meaning of the Kaddish, the Jewish custom of reciting a prayer to commemorate the death of a close relative. Join Charney as he finds out the history of the Kaddish and how it has evolved. Reviewed as a refreshing walk through Jewish history and a book that deserves to be read by both Jews and non-Jews, The Mystery of the Kaddish is now available online at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all other retailers and booksellers. Or download the audiobook at audible.com or on iTunes. Discover The Mystery of the Kaddish. Available now over iTunes, Amazon, and Google Play. Leon Charney's cantorial CD in Disco Lam. Listen as Charney movingly sings El Mole Rachamim and Charney's amazing rendition of a disco remix of Adon Olam, all sung in the incredible and individual Charney style. Also listen to the CDs on Rhapsody. Download Leon Charney's cantorial songs in Disco Lam, the disco remix of Adon Olam on Amazon, iTunes, and Google Play. Or listen in on Rhapsody. All available now.
We're back. I'm Leon Charney. I'm talking to Bryan Mark Rigg, who wrote Hitler's Jewish Soldiers, which became a real big hit, and now has another terrific book on called Rescued from the Reich, how one of Hitler's soldiers, a Nazi, saved the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And if you don't know who the Lubavitcher Rebbe is, let me explain to you that there are groups of Jews that are broken down into different sects, and one is Hasidim, which originally come from a fellow named from the Baal Shem Tov, and he was the man who fought against the Vilna Gaon. The Vilna Gaon was an intellectual in about the 17th, 18th century from the town of Vilna, and he was very much against Hasidism because Hasidism was not really studying. It was getting to God through song and dance and less intellectual, and it was a huge fight between them. But the Hasidic movement went on and on and on, and in many villages and townships in Poland and Ukraine, etc., you had different types of Rebbes. And one of the greatest Rebbes and one of the biggest Rebbes was the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and it's a dynasty. It's handed down from son to son to son, or if you don't have a son, it's a son-in-law. And it's a fascinating world, and very few people know a lot about it. So it's a fascinating book. So Byron's come up with this book, and it's a true story because I've heard a little bit about it, and now I'm going to read about it in depth. Welcome to the show, Byron.
Hey, thank you so much for having me, Leon.
How did you get involved in this? I mean, you look like a non-Hasidic guy. You would think that a Hasidic guy would do this.
Well, in 1992, I began doing research about Jews and men of Jewish descent who served in the Nazi military, the results of which were published in 2002 as Hitler's Jewish Soldiers.
We interviewed you on that.
Yeah, it was
great
2 years ago. It was great being here. Thanks for having me again. And during the course of this research, I came across a story about a Nazi soldier of Jewish descent who actually rescued this rabbi by the name of Schneerson. And I was like, how is that possible? So I started to explore it, and before I knew it, I was looking into a world of how our anti-Semitic, anti-refugee U.S. government actually worked with the Nazi Secret Service to rescue Joseph Isaac Schneerson, the 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe. And this was just mind-boggling to me. So,
why did they do it? The United States, was he that powerful a man that he had inroads in the United States? Tell me the story.
This is what's amazing. The Lubavitchers are very good about making their organization look a lot bigger and more powerful than what it actually is. And they were very good at this time in doing this. The Lubavitcher Rebbe had the good fortune in 1930 to have met with President Hubert Hoover, Justice Louis Brandeis, and Senator Robert Wagner during a goodwill tour here in the United States.
Really? So did he speak English?
No.
Yiddish?
No, Yiddish. So he had done this through translators. He was, always having advisors go along with him.
By the way, you speak Yiddish?
I'm bissela. I speak German.
So Guten Tag. You know what it means?
Yeah, Dankeschön. Guten Tag.
Sei gesund. German.
But, so getting back to his contacts in America, so he had met some of these politicians. So in 1939, when Germany invaded Poland, and he was stuck in Warsaw, many of his followers approached these individuals who he had met in 1930. And to his great luck and to his great surprise, these individuals decided to act on this rescue plan, because the Lubavitchers were very good about putting a name, a face, a prominent reputation, and a large following. They were saying, there's millions of followers out there following Rebbe Schneerson, and the U.S. government bit on the hook, and they decided to rescue this guy.
So they were American people, American Jewish people, who were Lubavitcher followers that went to the government?
Yeah, they were amazing in their networks. I mean, as you know, Leon, if you tell one rabbi, Lubavitcher rabbi, something tonight, 10,000 of them will know it tomorrow.
They're ubiquitous.
And so they were lucky in getting Louis Brandeis and Senator Robert Wagner to send this request up the chain of command. And this request eventually arrived at the desk of Assistant Attorney General Benjamin Cohen, the architect of the New Deal.
Jewish fellow?
Yes, from Poland, first generation here in America. And then Secretary of State Cordell Hull, who these two men then sent the request on to Roosevelt. Roosevelt surprisingly signed off on it. And soon thereafter, they started to organize a rescue plan with the German Secret Service. You know, strange bedfellows.
Wow, how'd they do that?
There was a gentleman by the name of Robert Pell who was involved with, he was an assistant director of the Foreign Affairs Office, and he had had a lot
Any
of...
relation to the Pells of Rhode Island?
I don't know.
Shaborn Pell, what was it? Senator Pell?
Oh, recently.
Right.
I don't know.
Probably.
I don't think so.
No? Okay.
Yeah. And so anyway, Robert Pell, he was very involved with the Avian Conference of 1938 when Roosevelt put together this conference in France to deal with the refugees coming out of Germany, and basically it was a sham. The conference found that, hey, there's too many of them, we don't want to deal with it. But during this time, Robert Pell met some German diplomats, one of them being Voltat, who was head of the 4-year plan under Goering. And Voltat told him, hey, if there's ever a Jew in Europe later on that you need help getting out, you let me know. So after Assistant Attorney General Benjamin Cohen got the okay from Roosevelt, he contacted Robert Pell and said, can you help me out with this request? We have a lot of people approaching me about this, Brandeis, Wagner, and so on. Can you do anything? Then Pell got in touch with Voltat under the 4-year plan, and then Voltat said, okay, I told you I would help you out a year ago. I'm going to stay true to my word, and I'm going to get you in touch with the head of the German Secret Service, Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, and see if he will help us rescue the Rebbe.
Was Canaris a Nazi?
Canaris was head of the German Secret Service. He's a strange bird. On one side, he did an awful lot to get invaluable military intelligence to the Wehrmacht, the German armed forces of World War II, so it could conduct incredible operations against Poland and France and even Russia. So he didn't agree with communism. He liked what Germany was doing in getting back its military power, its independence, away from the Versailles Treaty. But on the other side, he did not agree with Nazi racial ideology, and he had proved this by helping a lot of Jews escape Germany in the 1930s, and he had actually employed a lot of people of Jewish descent in his own organization. So from an ideological point of view...
That's your next book, Biography of Canaris. He's an interesting character.
Oh, he is a chameleon.
How did he die? Well,
he was against Hitler, and he had tried to remove him from power, and eventually the SS got word of this. And in 1943, he was kicked out of the Abwehr, the German Secret Service that he had built up. And in 1944, he was arrested and brought to a concentration camp, Flossenburg. He was interrogated during this time, beaten up horribly. His nose was cut off. And 1 month before the war ended, he was hanged and then put on a pile of wood and incinerated.
By the Germans.
By the Germans. So, from an ideological point of view, America contacting Canaris to help them out with the rescue of the Rebbe was a perfect match. Also, Canaris was a politician. He wanted to keep a certain modicum of goodwill between America and Germany in 1939 because they weren't at war with one another. And so he decided, I cannot ignore a request from the White House and the State Department. So then he ordered one of his most trusted officers, Major Ernst Bloch, to lead the mission on the ground. And this is what's crazy, Leon.
Bloch was Jewish?
Bloch was what the Nazis would call so-called half-Jew.
Your boy, one of Hitler's Jewish soldiers.
One of Hitler's Jewish soldiers. What the Nazis called Mischling. These are horrible terms. It means bastard, hybrid, mutt. And the Nazis used this term to describe partial Jews. And these half-Jews and quarter-Jews, a lot of them were in the military, and many of them were actually Aryanized. And Bloch was one of these men who had been Aryanized by Hitler. Hitler would look at these guys, and if they had blonde hair, blue eyes, a good military track record, even though they were half-Jewish or quarter-Jewish, he would say, hey, your Aryan blood, to use a Nazi term, dominates you. Therefore, I will declare you officially of Germanic blood. And so Bloch was one of thousands of people, literally, who received such exemptions from Hitler to remain in the military. You have generals, admirals, U-boat captains, battleship captains, Secret Service agents like Bloch. And this is heavily documented in my first book, Hitler's Jewish Soldiers.
Right.
So Canaris probably picked Bloch to rescue Schneerson, obviously because of Bloch's own Jewish background. But also Bloch was an incredibly professional soldier, very intelligent, spoke 3 foreign languages, and had a lot of international travel experience.
What was his unit? Secret Service?
He was head of the Economic Espionage Division of the Abwehr. And Bloch had come to know Canaris very well. Canaris had come to respect him tremendously. So they had a very good trust. So, I mean, imagine the scene, if you will.
Wow.
Bloch is ordered into Canaris' office, and Canaris says, hey, I got a strange mission for you.
Save the Rebbe.
You're going to go up to Warsaw, find the most ultra-Orthodox rabbi in the world, and you're going to rescue him. You can't miss him. He looks just like Moses. And then he sends him off to do that deed.
And how'd they work it out?
Well, Canaris, once he sent Bloch off, he sent the information to the White House about what he was doing in the State Department. And then our U.S. government informed the Lubavitchers in Brooklyn, New York. Then the Lubavitchers in Brooklyn, New York informed the Lubavitchers in Riga, Latvia. Then the Lubavitchers in Riga, Latvia started sending runners down on the ground to Warsaw to inform the Rebbe of this. But at first there was a lot of problems because Bloch was encountering a lot of skeptical Jews, obviously. You know, here's this battle-hardened veteran from World War I. He had this horribly disfigured face because he took a bayonet up through his jaw, his mouth, and into his brain.
Bloch?
Bloch in World War I. So his face is vertically divided by a scar. He has swastikas all over his uniform. He has iron crosses. And he's going up to ultra-Hasidic Jews, Lubavitcher Jews, with a lot of German soldiers, you know, and trained. And he's asking them, hey, where's the Rebbe? We want to rescue him. And the Lubavitchers are totally skeptical, saying, yeah, sure you do. And we want to join the German army. You know, where do we sign up? But eventually the Lubavitchers get the word that Bloch is indeed there to help rescue their Rebbe. And the Rebbe gives himself over to Bloch and about 20 of his closest advisors and family members. Now Bloch is faced with going through SS checkpoints. And one of the checkpoints he comes up, the SS officer is very skeptical. It's not the usual modus operandi of a Secret Service agent to escort 20 ultra-Orthodox Jews through Warsaw. And he says, what's going on here? And Bloch has to start using his acting skills about what he's doing. He says, we're taking these Jews to Berlin, we're going to interrogate them, and then we're going to shoot them. The SS officer is a little skeptical, but Bloch drops a few names like Canaris and then a few other high-ranking officers.
But he also had rank, didn't he have rank?
Well, the SS and the Wehrmacht,
yeah,
a little bit different. And this guy was a SS colonel, so they were. He outranked Bloch in the rank structure. But since they were in different organizations, it was very nebulous about who outranked who. Bloch's eventually, though, able to persuade this guy that his mission should not be messed with. And the SS officer opens up the barricade finally. Then Bloch gets in the truck with the Rebbe. He looks over to him. He says, don't worry about it. I'm half Jewish. I'm here to rescue you. Meshuggah.
Wow.
Crazy, but nonetheless true. And a lot of the Lubavitchers start building up the story at this time that Bloch was an angel in German disguise, or a hidden Jew in a World War I uniform.
Mashiach.
Sent there to rescue the Rebbe.
He probably was. All right, I got to cut for break. It's fascinating, titillating. Yeah, I mean, unbelievable. How did you get all this information?
Well, it's been a 10-year odyssey. Yeah,
wow.
I started uncovering this in a few. It's mentioned in a few little books in a paragraph.
I had heard this, by the way.
Yeah, but nobody really went into depth with it, and also nobody, to my knowledge, has gone into the different worlds to get all the sources to bring it all together into one book. The Lubavitcher sources, the sources in the German archives, sources in American archives, written in oral testimonies, interviews, and so that's what I try to do.
Work. All right, I got to cut for a break. We'll come right back, continue this really great story, and it's. Should be a movie. It is fantastic. And we'll talk about the Hasidim a little bit. Byron knows a lot about those communities. And during the war, by the way, there were a lot of different questions about the different Hasidic Rebbes and how they displayed their talents, shall we say. Some of them prevented their Hasidic followers from going, especially to Israel, because the Messiah wasn't there, the Mashiach wasn't there. Others, there's a lot of confusion. We'll talk about it. We'll be right back.
In modern Middle East history, only one peace treaty has stood the test of time, the 1978 Camp David Accord. In the new documentary film, Backdoor Channels, The Price of Peace, learn the true story behind the greatest diplomatic achievement of our time and its lessons for the future.
The price of peace is very high. To have this courageous man and my close men killed.
Winner of the Telly Award for Best Cultural Program. Now available at select stores including Barnes & Noble and online at Amazon.com. Now get the book the hit movie was based on, Leon Charney's Backdoor Channels. Learn about the backdoor channel negotiations that led to the historic 1978 Israeli-Egyptian peace treaty. Become a witness to history and order Backdoor Channels online at Amazon or Barnes & Noble. Also available at all other retailers and booksellers. Or download the audiobook at iTunes or Audible.com. Relive history. Order Backdoor Channels. Get best-selling author Leon Charney's latest book, The Battle of the Two Talmuds. Join Charney as he explores years of Jewish history to find out why and how Talmudic scholars and rabbis abandoned the Holy Land for the lands of the diaspora. Learn about the power struggles behind the creation of the Jerusalem and Babylonian Talmuds. It's a book critics call engaging and enlightening, a book which will be of interest to people of every faith. Now available at Amazon and Barnes & Noble, or download the audiobook of The Battle of the Two Talmuds at iTunes or audible.com. Leon Charney sets out to discover the true meaning of the Kaddish, the Jewish custom of reciting a prayer to commemorate the death of a close relative. Join Charney as he finds out the history of the Kaddish and how it has evolved. Reviewed as a refreshing walk through Jewish history and a book that deserves to be read by both Jews and non-Jews, The Mystery of the Kaddish is now available online at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all other retailers and booksellers. Or download the audiobook at audible.com or on iTunes. Discover the Mystery of the Kaddish. Available now over iTunes, Amazon, and Google Play. Leon Charney's cantorial CD in Disco Lam. Listen as Charney movingly sings El Mole Rachamim and Charney's amazing rendition of a disco remix of Adon Olam, all sung in the incredible and individual Charney style. Also listen to the CDs on Rhapsody. Download Leon Charney's cantorial songs in Disco Lam, the disco remix of Adon Olam on Amazon, iTunes, and Google Play. Or listen in on Rhapsody. All available now.
We're back with a brilliant writer. His name is Bryan Mark Rigg. He was on our show 2 years ago, Hitler's Jewish Soldiers. You've probably read the book. Now he comes out with this fantastic, interesting story about the rescue from the Reich of the Lubavitcher Rebbe by a Nazi. 10 years of research, a fascinating story. All right, the Hasidim during World War II. There were many sects. First of all, Schneerson, the one that was saved by the Nazi, is the 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe. Menachem Mendel Schneerson, who passed away in 1994, was the 7th Lubavitcher Rebbe. They had different philosophies, didn't they, about the war?
Oh, about the Holocaust.
Right.
You know, on one side you could say is dramatically opposed to one another. Other side you can say they just emphasize different aspects of the Holocaust. The 6th Lubavitcher
But 1 minute, Byron, I believe that the 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe was not a son, because he was a son-in-law.
Yeah, the Menachem Mendel Schneerson was not only the son-in-law to the 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe, Joseph Isaac Schneerson, but he was also his second cousin.
Right.
The Schneerson family practiced a lot of inter-family marrying.
Most Hasidim do, by the way.
Yeah, to keep the power structure.
Right. It's like the royalty of that world. Okay, so I'm sorry I interrupted you. So
yeah. So the 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe, his take on the Holocaust was that God was sending us a message. We were living in the end times. It was time of the Messiah, and that he believed God was really angry with Jews and that he was punishing them for their transgression, especially the American Jewish Treif community, as he called it, the American apostate Jewish community, which was largely secular and reform. And he believed God was punishing Jews for not keeping the Sabbath holy, not practicing family purity laws, studying Torah, praying, basically not keeping the 613 laws and commandments that God has given every Jew, the mitzvot. And many of his followers asked him, well, why had the pious been chosen to bear the brunt of God's retribution? Because most of the Jews dying in the Holocaust at this time were Polish and Russian. Right. Yet the Rebbe said that God was punishing, was using basically them as the sacrificial lamb for everybody else. And this is very controversial because the 7th Lubavitcher Rebbe, Menachem Mendel Schneerson, had a dramatically different approach to the Holocaust. He said, to say that Jews were being punished with the Holocaust for their sins is a desecration of God's name. He even said, that not even Satan himself could find sins enough to justify.
That's a real conflict between the two Rebbes.
Yeah, and this has caused a lot of controversy within the community when I've talked to people, because most people in the Lubavitch community today are stamped by Menachem Mendel Schneerson. They don't know about all these phrases and writings of the 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe.
The first Rebbe to hit America was the 5th Rebbe in 1950, or he came, what time, when did he get here?
I think the first Rebbe who came to America was the 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe during his Goodwill tour in 1929 and 1930.
No, but I mean, when the 5th Rebbe came, the man who was rescued.
Oh, when the 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe, when he was finally rescued, he came in 1940.
And where did he go to live?
He set it up, yeah, in Brooklyn, New York.
Brooklyn, New York. So he became the Rebbe.
He became the Rebbe.
Okay, so...
Well, he was always the Rebbe. He just was now the Rebbe in America.
Okay, the Rebbe in America. But Menachem Mendel, he was taking a degree in Sorbonne. He was...
well, he never got a degree in Sorbonne or Berlin. This is something, the myth in the Lubavitch community, there was this great engineer, he worked in the Secret Service, and he had these these degrees from Sorbonne and Berlin. There's no documentation for either one or all of those claims.
Really?
He did study in the Sorbonne. He did study in the University of Berlin. He did not get any degree. He did not get an engineering degree. And he did not work in the Navy Yard or the Secret Service.
So when did he come to America?
He came, this is what's amazing, Leon. After the rescue of the 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe, Joseph Isaac Schneerson, he starts doing a lot to try to rescue his followers and his yeshiva students and family members over in Europe. But most of these efforts were failures. But he was successful in getting out two important people, his daughter and his son-in-law, Menachem Mendel Schneerson. And if you don't have the rescue of the 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe in 1940, you don't have the rescue of the 7th Lubavitcher Rebbe in 1941 out of Vichy, France. And so he was taken out then, and then he became the Rebbe in 1951, 1 year after the 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe had died.
Okay, but when Menachem Mendel had a different outlook, did they confront one another, or you don't know?
No, I mean, the 7th Lubavitcher Rebbe was extremely respectful of his father-in-law. He would have never said, this is what my father-in-law said, this was wrong or a mistake. He would have said probably, I have not seen any writings on this, he would have probably said, he was saying what was right for the time, I'm saying something different. And that's how the Lubavitchers justify this now. But this is also, when you read the writings, it's very abrasive. I mean, he's very harsh with his criticism. He's very damning of people who he thinks are responsible for the Holocaust. And many people have taken issue with this.
All right, what did the Lubavitcher community say when they saw your book?
Well, you know, this is something that's very interesting. I had some Lubavitchers that told me at the beginning, and they're very ahistorical. They live in a very mystical time. Many of them believe they're living at the end of times. But some of them, because I was trying to get as many Lubavitchers to help me as I could. You know, please read this, give me feedback, I want to know more documents and so on. And many of them told me, like one told me, he said, hey, if you take out chapter 14, which is the chapter of the Rebbe in America and how he was dealing with other Jewish groups and his take on the Holocaust, they said, if you take that out, then I can assure you you'll get thousands of dollars and you'll be in many Chabad houses all over. They'll love your book. I was like, well, that's not the truth. And then I had another Lubavitcher Rebbe.
What is that chapter? Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you. One other thing the rabbi said, then I'll get to the chapter 14, and I'll tell you about it. Another rabbi got in touch with me. He says, hey, I got some new documents for you. But I want to just get, and they're going to give you a different perspective on the Rebbe's view of the Holocaust. I was like, hey, great. I'm a historian. I'm one person. I'd love to see him. He's like, but I'll tell you what. I'll give you 2 or 3 documents at a time. I'll see how you incorporate it in your book. If I agree with how you incorporate it, then I'll give you more documents. I was like, well, first of all, that's unethical. And second of all, if I look at all the documents, it's going to give me a totally different perspective than if I just read 2 or 3 at a time. So this is what the conflict sometimes of researching this community can present one. Now, what's chapter 14? What's so controversial is one is the Rebbe's take on the Holocaust. This is very controversial because who has the right to speak on God's behalf? As the famous Hasidic rabbi here in New York, Rabbi Chaskel Besser, he said, I'm not a prophet, I'm not in heaven, and I don't know why God did the Holocaust. All I know is I need to be as good as I possibly can. And then, so that's what's very controversial. Another thing that's controversial is the Rebbe is really taking issue with Kotler and Kamenovitz of the Vad Hatzalah. The rescue. Rabbi
Cutler from Lakewood Yeshiva.
Yeah,
and
Mir Yeshiva.
Mir Yeshiva in Cleveland, in Baltimore.
Yeah, and these guys.
These were, let me explain that. Sure. Most of the audience is not Jewish, or if you are, you may not know this. The Hasidim, they're Mitnagdim and they're Hasidim. Mitnagdim are the ones really followers of the Vilna Gaon, and Hasidim are the Baal Shem Tov. So there's basically a fight between, they're both Orthodox and they both have a viewpoint. One was more into learning, the other was dance, but today joy and the way you celebrate, but today it seems to be a little bit merged. So he was against the Vad Hatzalah was the organization. We had Zuraf on the show, he wrote a book about it, which was out to save, I think it was headed by Rabbi Eliezer Silver, and I think they were out to save as many Jews as possible, but it became a money thing. It's very complicated, very controversial. Very controversial book. Zuraf has done some great work there. Right. Basically, the underlying theme, though, what Cutler and Kamenovitz were doing is they were doing as much as they could to rescue lives, and the historical record is very clear on this. They were going and they were meeting with politicians, they were petitioning them, they were organizing protest marches, they were meeting with Christian leaders, secular reform leaders, and the Rebbe, he was not opposed to doing some of these things, but he felt that these leaders were unnecessarily compromising their religious integrity. There was one phrase coming out, in his newspaper calling it Jewish Nazism. Really? He believed these people, were, by meeting on Shabbat,
they were not focusing on the true goal, which was we got to focus on God, because only God can change the situation. Well, Cutler and Kamenovitz were in strong disagreement with this. They said we have to take...
They were very Orthodox people.
Very Orthodox. Their main language also was Yiddish.
Right.
And they were also old, but they were doing everything to fight to save lives. And what's amazing is while the Rebbe is condemning them, these guys, working with Morgenthau, were able to bring about the War Refugee Board in 1944, which saved between 100 to 200,000 lives, according to historian David Wyman. They were incredible. And so the Rebbe made mistakes, and this is also what's controversial. You see that he missed the boat in some respects, and that's what's very abrasive.
It's very hard for the community to accept that.
Yeah, because the Rebbe doesn't
know. Menachem Mendel Schneerson is dead now 10 years, and people have always asked this question. Number one, why he never visited Israel, and I don't know if you know the answer. You're not a rabbi. And number two, is who runs the Lubavitcher organization now?
Well, I can answer the second question with some experience. The organization is very, very fluid, and there's many different groups. I mean, I found that if I accidentally talk to people who believe in the Messiah concept, that Menachem Mendel Schneerson is indeed the Mashiach, and there's a lot of them out there.
Rabbi Butman?
Huh?
Rabbi Butman?
And there's many of them out there. Then other people who are of the non-Mashiach group would not talk to me, and vice versa. Also, within the group that is not of the Mashiach group, there's different factions within there, and they're protecting their turf. Since Menachem Mendel Schneerson has died, there's been a vacuum in the leadership.
Does anybody why he didn't try to appoint somebody? Was there no descendant of Schneerson?
Well, a lot of people fault him for not doing so. There are Schneerson family members out there, but of course he had no children, and so the heir apparent was not obvious.
Right.
And many of them will tell you in the community today that in the Mashiach group, they're saying there's no need for another leader because he was indeed the Messiah. He was the perfect human being. But in the non-Mashiach group, they're saying, well, there's just not a leader out there of that caliber. And this has divided the community in many ways. It's split it up, and it's much more fractious than what Lubavitchers will lead you to believe. And it's a sad thing, because Lubavitcher has an awful lot of good, but now they're fighting amongst themselves quite a bit. And you have to be careful as a historian going in there of knowing which group that you need to ally yourself with to just get to the truth.
Did you go to 770?
Oh, several times. Yeah, 770, and the basement there, where the Rebbe did his Farbringen, his sermons and so on.
Right.
That's all controlled by the Messiah group. But then up in the offices, that's of the non-Messiah group. So it's a house divided, within itself.
And they're very big. I mean,
it's the largest Hasidic community in the world, based out of Brooklyn.
And they're all over the world. They have shliachs, which are emissaries all over the world. Wherever you go, you can always find Chabad House, which is part of their part of their organization. It's an amazing group. The story is fantastic, and it's part of the Judaic process, and it's been going on since Abraham. Believe me, these things, these are forever. You've done a great job.
Thank you, Leon.
This is a tremendous book, and if you want to know more about Hasidism, I think there's another woman who wrote a book called Sue Fishkoff.
Yeah, Sue Fishkoff wrote The Rebbe's Army.
And did you read it?
Yes, and she's a wonderful writer.
And she gets it down?
She does a very good, her job, she says, hey, I can go into a lot of the controversial aspects of the community, but that's not my job. She says, I have to look at this, what motivates these people to go up and build, Chabad houses all over the world.
All right, we'll try to find out the answer.
Thanks, Leon.
I think it's secret. Anyway, we'll see you next week, and watch the Middle East. We hope it's improving.